A terrible secret and a definite task. The snap box, because that's what I was calling it, still had the few items in it. I could hear them rattling around. I put the box on my desk and got it open. Then I poured the items out. As far as I could tell, they were all there. That gave me plenty to think about, but I won't go through all that. I'm sure I didn't think about anything you aren't thinking now. The bottom line is, the box did kill Pete, and it killed Catherine, and it hadn't killed anyone else. But what still bothered me was why. I was definitely thinking about Catherine when I put the paper in, and I intended her harm at the time. But did she when she put the G.I. Joe in? I didn't think so. It was just the first thing that she found. It didn't really correspond to Pete either, or his equipment. I didn't want to see the box again. I thought about burying it or taking it way out into the woods. But if I did, it would probably end up in someone else's hands eventually, the same way it did mine. And if you didn't understand what the first line of this whole thing meant, or you haven't skipped ahead to the end, it means I don't want you to open this box. I had to find a way to get rid of it once and for all. You're probably thinking, just burn it. But I had figured out the box was not made of cherry, but of ipe, Brazilian walnut, which is almost impossible to burn, and it had a finish that I couldn't identify, but which acted like a fire shield. I tried to burn it with a lighter, and the sooty smudge it left wiped away as if nothing had happened. Ipe is also extremely strong, and hitting it with a baseball bat would probably just break the bat. No, I would have to find some other solution, so for the time being, I put it all the way in the back part of the top shelf of my closet. I thought about putting a sign on it saying, "Do not open." But what good would that do? Anytime you put a sign on something that says "Do not touch," people immediately want to touch, or enter, or open. And "Please open" wouldn't do anything either. I had a vague fear that I would die and someone else would find it, and there was nothing I could do about that. So I bided my time and thought about other ways to destroy it. Maybe put it in a crushing machine. But that was easier said than done. Dynamite? Acid? Same thing. Looking back, however, I'm not sure I wanted to find a solution. Yes, being the steward of that box was a burden. I had to think about how I, really, had effectuated my sister's death. And I couldn't deny to myself that I had done it on purpose. It would have to be a lifelong secret, and I had an inkling of the consequences of that. Never, ever being able to tell anyone, no matter how close they were. Even worse, strangely, telling someone the truth would still not have relieved me. Who would believe my story? And how could I prove it without killing someone else? And would that really prove anything? But there was one other thing that made me hesitate. The box held great power. I also had an inkling that I may one day regret giving it up. I did not understand the box, but destroying it, if that were even possible, would erase its secrets forever, along with its potential. And I imagined, as the keeper of any great weapon does, that I may be able to use it for good. My mother made me go to see a counselor, and to him I could definitely not reveal my true thoughts. The sessions were torture already, and telling the truth would only have resulted in more of them. I had to make up believable emotions for him so he'd let me free. But how does an almost 12-year-old know what kind of emotions to have when a best friend and mentor dies and then a sister? Especially when your real emotions, guilt, fear, and remorse, had to be covered. There was one time I mentioned the idea of remorse, and he told me that people feel at fault sometimes when someone else close to them dies. He said I needed to release that feeling of guilt because it wasn't mine. Thing is, it was mine. forever. I really hated his beard. He looked a lot like the father in Family Ties, which I'd seen in reruns. It was years later that I realized if you want to talk to a boy, you don't sit him on a couch and blab on and talk about emotions. You get a ball and kick it back and forth. That's when he'll talk. That's what I did for my son, but that's getting way ahead of things. Back to the timeline. You need to know the timeline. Just one lie. Gabrielle and I got even closer over that summer. We spent all our time together. I barely hung out with Jeff at all, and like I said, that game of Risk never came to completion. Gabrielle never quizzed me on my feelings. We did the usual things together: gardening, playing with the dollhouse, shooting the slingshot. And trust me, I looked forward to a kiss when we met and a kiss goodbye later on, just like we were husband and wife. And I know she was in love with me, too. And it wasn't just that fleeting puppy love. I already told you my mother was amazed we still called each other boyfriend and girlfriend after 6 months, and it didn't change. She was there at my party when I turned 12, and she gave me a pocket knife with my name on it. She was 5 months younger than me, so I couldn't reciprocate for a while, but I kept it in my bedside table or in my pocket from that time forward. We read the rest of the summer books together, sometimes reading aloud to each other, sometimes just reading together out in a field, or in her room, or on the porch. We hiked together a lot. I showed her that burned house, and we went to Bob's when we could get a ride. We would stay late at each other's houses until our parents made us go home, and they never let us sleep over, though we asked. Still, we sneaked out at night and took walks in the woods and kissed. But that's all we did. We were both too modest and, believe it or not, too innocent to know what else to do. It was exciting to be out together without permission, and that was enough. We never ran out of things to talk about, and even when we were both silent, it felt like we were talking. I only told her one lie. She asked what happened with that weird box I had mentioned. I said I never figured out what happened with the G.I. Joe. I said Catherine must have taken it back out. But then I told her that I couldn't figure out how to open it anymore. She said she wanted to see it, and though I avoided it, I eventually let her. Too much resistance would make her suspect it was for a real reason. When I pulled it out of my closet, I pretended to try to open it to show her. But it wouldn't open anymore. But she wanted to try. I pretended to try to open it to show her it wouldn't open anymore, but she wanted to try. My chest felt heavy as she pushed and pulled and squeezed. She shook it, turned it over, looked at it, tried again. I was praying that it wouldn't decide to open for her. If it did, well, it didn't. I said I'd tell her if I ever figured it out, and that I would ask one of my dad's woodworker friends about it. That part was a fib, not a lie, and I only did it so she would forget the box. And so from there, time seemed to accelerate, and years passed. We stayed together. Our parents called us old souls, or angels who were made to be together. Everyone expected us to break up eventually because isn't that what happens with early relationships? You move on to someone else. But with us, that didn't happen. High school came and went, and we were still together. And then we both went to UNH, and a month after graduation, we were married. That right there was the high point, the pinnacle of my life. Say whatever you want about how it's the bride's day. It was for me, too. I had wanted to marry her all along, and it happened. And we were going to be happy forever. Killing it at work. One thing you have to know about Gabrielle is that when we got married at the same age, she was making a sacrifice, although I only vaguely knew it at the time. A girl like her, good-looking, great personality, could get an older guy with more money easily. maybe 5 or 10 years older, and then she could have not worked and had a richer life. Us two starting out together was a challenge, and we were both afraid about whether we could afford children. But I majored in materials, science, and geology, and that meant I could get started at a construction company. That gave me a chance to find a job at a factory making lightweight metals, and later, I was able to land a job scouting for oil fields. So I was an asset as someone who knew how to drill, and knowing about alloys was a great sub-skill, and where to drill. And I put in a lot of extra hours to move myself up the ladder quickly. Before long, I had that six-figure salary with the prospect of high six figures before the decade was out. That gave me the wherewithal for Gabrielle to quit her job and have our baby, Cam Jr., who was healthy and strong. So in other words, I was killing it. At least that's the public part of the story. I had a little help. You see, there were a lot of ways of moving up the company ladder. Being competent is not usually one of them. Have you ever seen a mid-level boss who knows what he's talking about? Do you think regional managers or vice presidents know any more about their business than the average worker who's been there 2 years? One way is to know the right people. Another is to sleep around. Schmoozing is always a must, of course. You can always be in the right place at the right time. What you really have to do is be just good enough and know enough people that people think you are the right one to move up. Being competent, or worse, being outstanding, will only mean the bosses will want to keep you right where you are. Heck, a little selective incompetence can work wonders for you, because the easiest way for one boss to get rid of you is to sing your praises and get you promoted into a different department. But even if you do everything right, you can still benefit from an extra nudge. A little nudge in the right direction. There was one time when I needed it. You see, Steve, that's not his real name, was hired in the same cohort as I was, and we trained together. But we were put in different divisions. We were of the same heart and mind when it came to work. We were there for the money, not the company family, as the boss would tell us. We were not there for the pinball machines that collected dust in the employee inspiration room. Steve also knew the same things I did about getting moved up. I didn't know them by nature, by the way. I learned through careful observation in high school, where being popular required the same skill set. First and foremost, believe it or not, for all you jealous types, you have to actually be a good guy. You have to do people favors, help them out, be nice to them. They'll be nice back. Then you just have to get them lined up behind you so that when there is that opening to move up, be it to the leader of the pack or the head frisbee captain, they are there to support you. And the main teachers have to like you, so you have to be cooperative and nice to them, but not too much so. They need to think you could go either way, toward being a good kid or a bad kid. When you make the right decisions, they'll feel like they influenced you. I realized that, of all places, in history class studying Julius Caesar, see, all that maneuvering with the other generals, all that getting the hottest girls, all that work to outmaneuver Crassus, the real top dog, his ability to steal money and conquer Gaul, mostly illegally, and then march on Rome and then have people thank him for it, that was all high school writ large. And people like Lepidus, he came later, Lepidus the Suave, he thought he was one of the big boys, but got totally sidelined. So let that be a lesson for you. Opportunities to learn can come up anywhere. But don't do what I did. In retrospect, I could have gotten all the same stuff with a little more patience. But I was impatient. I went for the nudge. It was between me and Steve as to who would move up to VP of Exploration. Next step up was, of course, President of Exploration. And then you were a contender for CEO. And I wasn't sure I would get the job. For that matter, I was pretty sure he would. Somehow, I didn't have the same confidence I always had had with Jeff. I always knew when I was going to beat him at Risk or any of the video games we played in later years. But Steve, he had me nervous, and losing to him could mean a long wait. It could mean having to go to another company to get the same opportunity. So after nights of fitful sleep, which reduced my performance and hence confidence even more, and after looking at Gabrielle as she slept and thinking of how I wanted her to have everything, and thinking about our toddler in the next room, who was soon going to be old enough to tell if Daddy was a big man or a small man, I remembered the snap box. At that time, it was in a box in the basement of the house. As soon as I remembered it, I had a 3D image of the house with me and Gabrielle in bed and the box 2 stories down, glowing green in my mind as it beckoned me. And I rose from my bed and went to the basement and found it. And I brought it upstairs to my office and cleaned off all the papers and set it down on my large, finely finished desk, fit for the office I felt destined to have, and stared at it. It was silent. I could feel no draw toward it, no voice, no whisper, if that's what you expect me to say. It was just the box. I looked at it for what must have been 10 minutes. Then I closed my eyes. Set, focus, pull. The box opened on the first try. As if in a trance, I opened the top drawer of my desk, took out a piece of paper, and wrote Steve on it. I held it toward the opening, slowly pushing it forward, ready to snatch my hand back, and snap, the box closed. I put it back in the box in the basement. I wouldn't need to find out if the paper was gone. And I went to bed. It was a sound sleep. Gabrielle wants to know. The next 2 days I spent in the pleasant expectation of the news that Steve had come into some unfortunate circumstances. That Monday, I had my cell phone out right where I could see it. I had my email ready on the screen, and nothing. Tuesday was more of nothing, and so was Wednesday. I couldn't figure out what went wrong. That night, I sneaked down to the basement after Gabrielle was asleep and got the box. I brought it to my office and put it on the desk. This time I couldn't get it open, so I shook it around. Something moved inside. It was just a light sound, and I reasoned it must have been the paper. With a few more tries, I got the box open, and there it was. I picked it up and stared. Suddenly, I heard my wife coming in behind me. She put her arms around my shoulders and neck and kissed my cheek. Cam woke me up. But he went back to sleep pretty fast, just a bad dream. What you doing? I was flustered, but I said, "Oh, just looking over some papers and tidying up. I couldn't sleep." "Wait a minute, Cam. Is that the same box you had like years ago?" I knew there was no way out. "Yeah, it's been downstairs. But that was like 15 years ago. More. I thought that box was a secret." "It was, yeah. It was in my closet for the longest time. And then, I don't know. I just packed it up with the other stuff and forgot about it." "But why did you bring it out tonight?" "Oh, just fooling around, I guess. It just popped into my mind." She stood and picked it up. "And you got it open. What's the paper?" She reached for it before I could react. Why hadn't I crumpled it into my hand as soon as she came in? "Steve? What the hell is this?" She didn't sound sure whether she was suspicious or just surprised. "I don't know. It was in the box. I don't remember it." She put it back on the desk. "You're an odd man, Mr. Benson. An odd man." She turned to go back toward the door. Relieved, I stood up to follow, but not before I put the box on the high shelf in the closet. The less said, the better, I thought. But why? But the puzzle about the box kept me up. Why hadn't it done anything? Occam's razor occurred to me. If I shaved away every anything different about what happened with Pete, Catherine, and Steve, I would have my answer. They weren't the same age or sex. They weren't family members. Different objects brought about their deaths. What was the same about Pete and Catherine that they didn't have in common with Steve? Many of the same things, actually. Pete and Catherine weren't both family, but then again, they were like family. I didn't mean to do it with them. No, that wasn't true. I did mean to do it to Catherine. But she didn't mean to do it to Pete. But she was angry with me, and she liked Pete. And there was the answer. Both Pete and Catherine were killed because someone who cared about them put something connected to them in the box. I was upset with Catherine a lot, but still, she was my sister, and I did care about her somewhat. I guess you could say I loved her as a sister, although I tried to keep separate my later romanticized feeling toward her that didn't exist as strongly at the time. And that was about where she was with Pete. She liked him, but it wasn't the sort of love and idol worship I had. I had some respect for Steve, but only as a rival. I didn't dislike him much, but he had his annoying qualities, and the fact that he was an obstacle to me only made certain things he did that much more irritating. Since I had decided to put his name in the box, I had amplified his unlikable qualities even more to make it easier for me to see him go. This I had done subconsciously, and I only realized it then, when the true nature of the box was making itself clear. If I was going to kill Steve, he would have to be a friend. Better put, he would have to be someone I would miss, someone whose death I would long remember. Oh God, I thought, this is not going to be easy. How was I going to make friends with Steve? What kind of evil logic was this? But remember what I said about being popular in school? You have to actually be nice to people. I hated to admit it, but that was why Steve was ahead of me for his promotion. People liked him more than me. And yet it meant I would be able to make friends. Real friends. Because he was that kind of guy. He would like to make friends. The next day, I called Steve on the phone and asked if he and his wife would like to go to dinner with me and Gabrielle. Of course, he didn't pick up right away. This was actually one of the things that annoyed me about him. He let it go to message and then called me back 10 minutes later. Just enough time to let me get engaged in some other task. So it was an interruption. It was a minor power play. He said, yes, of course they'd love to. We would meet the weekend after next. One step at a time, I thought. One step at a time.